Hey guys, my name is Daniel,
And I'm Mariah.
and we have started this. How did we say we wanted to start again?
And today we're going to talk about.
Okay, and today we're going to talk about. We should make sure to add this part. And today we're going to talk about relationship conflict. So we had a different topic planned for today, and then we were gearing up to film, and there was a bit of a conflict slash misunderstanding, and we're like, oh, this is the perfect time to talk about it. I think that sometimes the temptation with the YouTube world or content creation in general is to like talk about what's been well articulated or planned or curated. But we're like, oh, this is the perfect time when it's fresh in our mind to talk about relational conflict.
Yeah, so today we're going to share a little bit about our differences in hopes of helping people out there, whether you're dating or engaged or married, just open up a conversation about maybe what some of your differences are and how do you talk through them.
Yeah, and a key difference that we see in our relationship is that I'm an internal processor when it comes to conflict, when it comes to decision making, when it comes to strategizing, whatever it is. And Mariah's an external processor, so she likes to be able to verbally
I like to talk.
articulate, verbally articulate what she's thinking, what she's feeling, what she's sensing. And I think that's a difference. Like people talk about introvert, extrovert. People talk about loud, quiet, messy, dirty. But people don't talk about a lot like processing tendencies.
Which is really important because you're doing that so often throughout your relationship.
And so something I realize in our relationship is that my internal processing can sometimes be a challenge for you.
Yeah.
I don't mind listening to external processing, but I feel like sometimes when I internally process, or at least I guess I take a longer time to communicate where I'm at.
Yeah, and I think I have a hard time understanding his the fact that he even internally processes because I will think like, okay, does he even care about this? Like he hasn't said anything. He doesn't seem affected by whatever is going on. Whereas me right away, it helps me figure out how I'm feeling as I speak about it.
Yeah.
Whereas you want to figure out how you're feeling in your head before you speak about it.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes the temptation in relationships is to assume that your way of processing, so for me, I'm an internal processor. I think sometimes people think that like their way is the best way or their way is the most understandable way. But what we have to realize is that God's created us all differently, with different wiring and tendencies and stuff like that. And the job is not to convert your couple or your spouse or significant other to your way of processing, but it's to better understand their way of processing. So for example, like if I'm in this place where I'm like, I'm going through a tough time with my family, or maybe there's something that Mariah did that I'm offended by or hurt by or whatever it is, it's not up to her to just learn how to best understand and cope with what I'm feeling, but I think the onus is a bit on me to be able to communicate like, oh, just so you know, I know that sometimes you can be silent for a minute and then be ready to articulate what you're feeling. Sometimes I need 60 minutes to really stew on it and process it or whatever.
5 to 10 business days.
5 to 10 business days.
And then he'll be ready to talk about it.
But something that I've had to cope with or not cope with, but realize is that I think although I'm an internal processor, there comes a point where if I'm to withhold what I'm truly thinking or truly feeling and say like, okay, from start to end, it's going to be internalized, I'm actually robbing you from a measure of intimacy that you're entitled to as my wife and partner. And I think that sometimes we miss that because we think that like, oh, like I'm good. Like I thought about it for a bit, or I went for a run or played some basketball and I'm good. And I'm no longer, but it's just like me inviting her into what I was insecure about or what I was hurt by or what I was really feeling actually robs her from a degree of intimacy that she deserves.
Yeah, and I think it robs a connection or even the ability to relate, because sometimes I'll feel like, okay, am I the only one that feels this way about a situation? Because he hasn't vocalized it doesn't mean he doesn't feel it as well. So if he's able to be vulnerable in that moment and tell me, hey, I feel this way about this too, it can help us to connect on a deeper level.
And something that we do in relationships is we almost limit, especially in Christian relationships, sometimes we limit intimacy to sexual intimacy, and we don't really crack open the wide kind of vast array of versions of intimacy that are accessible in relationships and that exist to strengthen relationships. And I think sometimes, at least early on in our relationship, I neglected that, like, oh man, actually me articulating myself to her is a form of intimacy that affects all forms of intimacy. So it doesn't only affect like our emotional relationship, it affects our spiritual relationship, sexual relationship. Every component of our connectedness is affected when I actually step out and embrace vulnerability and sometimes uncomfortability in order to express where I'm at with Mariah.
Okay, so if you had to summarize it, what's one tip you would give to an internal processor like yourself who's in a relationship with an external processor like me?
Yeah. I think something that I would say is that, like, one, you're created as an internal processor for a reason. So I think another mistake we can do is say, like, oh, because you're an internal processor, and internal processing sometimes is a limiter to intimacy. I think sometimes what we can do is say, like, become an external processor, and that's the best way for an internal processor to become a good processor, is by externalizing. Yeah. That was a lot. That was a lot.
A lot of internal, I'm confused, you're confused.
But I think sometimes, just to make it as clear as possible, sometimes what we try to do is make internal processors external processors. But that's not necessarily the right thing. I think something that we should do, however, is give internal processors better tools to be able to, like, give justice to their internal processing. So something that I'll do is say, like, oh yeah, could you give me till the morning? Or could you give me till lunch? Or after my run, can we talk about this? Yeah. And I think that giving yourself some time, but also not letting yourself off the hook, is key. And because for me, if she left me, I'd be okay with leaving it as an internal thing. But I think when I set that definitive, like, deadline, like after the run or in the morning, we're given a timestamp as to when we're going to talk about it. Yeah. I think that's one of them.
That's good, yeah. And I feel like if you are the person, the relationship that's like me, that processes externally, don't be afraid to ask your boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse about their feelings, and ask them, hey, it would help me out a lot to know how you're feeling about this. Yeah. Because sometimes I would assume that he wasn't feeling anything, which isn't true. Yeah. All it took was me just asking the simple question to be able to know where you're at.
And then maybe let's let the community into, like, what do you feel inside when you can visibly tell. There's sometimes I'm not so good at hiding when there's something on my mind or something's affecting me. Yeah. But, like, when in those times when you feel like, oh, I know there's something going on with Dan, like, what are you feeling? And then what's something that's helpful for you from me to receive in that?
I think when I can tell that you're kind of visibly frustrated with a situation or hurt, how it affects me is I try to, like, I don't know, it's kind of depends on the situation, but I'll try to, like, help you out or be kind, and if those things still aren't kind of, like, turning it around, then I try to make space for, like, okay, hey, how are you feeling? Is there something I did to annoy you? Was it when I said this that frustrated you? Can we talk about it? Yeah. And that for me really helps me, because sometimes with my communication style or just with whatever I did, I'm not completely aware. Yeah. And so it helps to just put it out in the open. But for me, that just helps a bit more to, like, know how you're feeling, instead of, I can just see Daniel's trying so hard to push away your feelings or trying to, like, mask it, but I can tell. Like,
Yeah.
when you're married to someone, even when you're dating someone, you know them so well, and so you can tell something's going on. And so for me, it just makes it easier if I'm able to ask about it, and we're even able to talk about it, even if it's a hard conversation in the moment.
And I think that, like, there's a lot of, like, again, in the industry, in, like, the YouTube world, if I can say, there's a lot of people who will, like, again, not in a negative way, but, like, say, like, oh, we're being authentic, but let's pull the veil back a bit and, like, just show them how, like, real and, like, even, like, recent this is. Immediate and recent.
Yeah, like, basically we were going to film a completely different video today, and we just weren't on the same page.
Like, this is within the last 30 minutes.
Yeah, and we weren't on the same page, and we were having a hard time coming up with what we want, and, like, just agreeing on what we wanted to say in the video. And I could tell Daniel was a bit frustrated, but I couldn't tell why, if it was me or if it was the process. And so I asked about it, and we were able to talk about it a bit. I don't know if you want to share.
Yeah. So we were able to talk about it. So I just expressed, like, this is what I'm feeling about the kind of creative process.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling like we're not really getting to our best.
Yeah.
And so what we ended up doing is Mariah said, like, okay, I'm gonna go for a walk. And this wasn't like, again,
I wasn't like, I'm going for a walk.
I'm storming out. Yeah, we're not really that couple to, like, maybe there'll be something that comes in the future that makes us feel like I really need to get away from you. But we haven't had that moment yet.
Actually, you know what? Me going for a walk, I think, was to help your internal processing side. Because
guys, we're live. This is like you're watching us live.
In those moments where we have conflict, the last thing I want to do is leave you. Yeah. Like, what I want to do is sit and talk about it forever until we have it resolved. But I just could tell, like, we just needed a little bit of space. And so I literally went, 15 minutes or less? Like, 15-minute walk. Daniel worked on some stuff here. And then when we got back, we started talking. And that led to this video. Yeah. Because we were real-time processing our conflict and just what we went through.
And I don't think I talked to you about this yet, but when you were gone, I was working on a couple things. We're going to Europe this summer, so I was working on the trip a bit.
Did you really miss me when?
And we haven't. I did miss you while you were gone. Felt like a piece of me was missing.
I was hoping you'd say that when I walked in the door.
Yeah, I didn't. I was still internal processing when she walked in the door. But yeah, I think it's so important for couples. Again, it's brilliant when there's two external processors in a relationship. I think it could be a bit rocky if there's two internal processors in a relationship. I think what's important for couples is to try to determine what kind of processor you are. So when it comes to a bad day, when it comes to a conflict at work or school on your sports team, like, what is your natural response? So for me, it would be like, oh, I'm just going to think about this for a bit, and then I'll eventually get over it. For Mariah, you can speak for yourself, but I'm assuming it would be like, oh, I got to tell something.
If I have a hard day, I want to talk to you about it right away. And I think something that happens to me and probably other people who externally process is what I say, it doesn't always make the most sense or have the most reason because I'm processing it real time.
Live time.
Whereas when you say something, you've thought about it for a while and it's like perfectly articulated and you know what you're talking about. Whereas I can sometimes just be like, I don't know, this is how I feel, and I'm like spitting it all out and trying to figure it out.
And I'm trying to get better at like live time and meeting you there, because I do think that there's a lot of positives to how you process. But what I was gonna say is, like, just make sure to take some time to really determine who you are in the relationship. Are you external? Are you internal? And then how can I even make better accommodations for not only my significant other, but friends, relatives, siblings, whatever it is, who are maybe the opposite of me.
Yeah, I think it's such an important conversation to have in a relationship. If you haven't had that already, make sure to sit down with your boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, fiance, whoever it is, and ask them how you can support them better in their processing, and maybe voice some ways that you've felt maybe unsupported or not seen super well in the way you process. And one thing that I wanted to leave you guys with is, oftentimes when we talk to couples, we do a lot of like premarital counseling and we'll walk alongside.
young dating couples, young singles, young marrieds, people who are preparing for marriage. And something that I recognize is that almost every single conflict or problem boils down to communication. And again, I could probably, if you're dissecting things, you can make the case that it's a lack of humility thing, or it's a family of origin thing, or whatever. But a lot of times, the common thread is actually poor communication. So the reason why we think this is such an important thing to dial in is that when we realize how we process and how to best leverage and even accommodate our processing style for people who are maybe different than us, I really do believe that your friendships will become better, your coworker relationships will become better, your dating relationships will become better, marriages will become better, and then your relationship as well with your kids, if you have them, will become better. So as you continue to have these conversations, process internally or externally, we want to continue to keep the conversation going. Like we've mentioned before, we don't think the best conversations are going to be the ones that are happening on this side of the camera, but the ones that are happening in the comments. So let's keep the conversation going. Message any questions or thoughts you have. Again, this isn't super comprehensive, but it's just a conversation sparker.
Yeah, so leave your comments, like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
Leave your comments, like and subscribe, and we will talk to you guys soon.
Subscribe is just one of those hard words.
I know.
This is a hard word.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Be blessed as you go. We love you guys. Again, we just want to be as real as we can be as we're helping couples on, singles, couples on, as we seek to be the best people we can be in relationships and outside of them.
Yes. Okay. See you next week.